What is going on? Just want to do a video here. Obviously, it's a fucking video. Got into a really interesting conversation this weekend. I had a couple people over to train in my garage, and just got into a really interesting conversation about just kind of tapering for a meet. How do you actually peak for a meet, and what's actually going on when you actually compensate and you're getting all your stuff all tied together to compete. The whole point of training is to perform well on one day, one afternoon, pretty much, and then 9 lifts over 95% most likely, over 90%. What are some things that need to be taken into consideration? Like, how heavy should you be lifting the week of the meet, stuff like that. Just kind of little things, but I just want to go a little bit deeper into a couple little concepts that I think are super interesting. So I really love the concept of residual training effects. So what that means is the residual training effect is how long you've taken the time, you've trained a skill, whether it's like strength, endurance, speed, like explosive power, something like that. So you've dedicated enough time to elicit some kind of positive outcome, positive improvement in that skill. So if you were to totally cease training, exactly how long would you maintain that benefit? Now, residual training effects, the first time I read about them was just something Vladimir Isharin wrote a while ago. It was actually mentioned, it was in the block periodization book, but he talks about it in a couple of different studies and stuff, and it's basically the basis of the entire block periodization system are these residual training effects, and how long you can not train something and still experience the benefit from the training that you've already completed, geared towards a specific skill or set of skills or whatever. So in regards to peaking for a meet, obviously the most important skills you want to develop are maximal strength, maximal force development, maximal power, stuff like that. Unfortunately, those are the skills that, when ceased, last the shortest. You basically have a 3 to 7 day window of stopping any kind of speed, power, maximal strength training before you start getting some negative effects of that. So it's just interesting that people train and lift so light the week of a meet when it could very well be, you're not getting any kind of decent return off of the rest of your training program, and you're basically losing some of your strength over that period of time because you're not eliciting enough of a response from the training, and your body's basically thinks that you've ceased that training altogether. I don't know. I think as far as training for a meet, like the week of, I think it's a really good idea to do some kind of heavier RPE work, even if it's like a single. If a week out you hit like an RPE of a 9 on squats just for 1 rep, drop it down, either do some lighter percentage stuff after that, or just kind of stay along with what you typically do when you're doing your strength training cycles and stuff in general. That's not necessarily getting exactly prepared for a meet. So that's it's kind of one thing to kind of consider there. And then you can always, it really seems like people do a lot better benching a little bit heavier closer to a meet. Like maybe even if you're competing on a Saturday or a Sunday, maybe in a Wednesday or the Thursday before, kind of doing the same thing, hitting a 9 for a paused single, and just kind of, it shouldn't be too bad. You've been training, you've been deloading, hopefully, you're dropping your volume anyway, but the intensity's staying up there. And that brings me to my next kind of point. The biggest things you want to keep in your taper or deload week or peaking cycle is intensity. You don't want the intensity to drop. You want to keep intensity, and you want to keep frequency, and you just want to make a significant drop in volume. So whatever that means to your training, it's going to be totally individual, but those are the two things that have to be there. The exact same frequency you were lifting with to begin with, and then that intensity needs to stay pretty jacked up. So I touched on that point of benching a little bit closer to a meet, benching heavy a little bit closer to a meet. Now this is going to get into some kind of really crazy voodoo shit here, but this is some of the stuff I studied doing my master's degree, and it's super, super interesting to me is how our fiber types respond to training. Now, like when we're born, we have a genetic distribution of cross-sectional area of type 1 and type 2 fibers. Now I'm talking super general here, because there's more to it than that. So type 1 is your slow twitch, kind of aerobic, more along the lines of endurance kind of fibers. Type 2 is your fast, explosive, short burst, short duration, anaerobic, basically just pure, bare fist knuckle boxing a bear in the middle of the woods, because you're gonna die if you don't beat this thing to death with your bare hands. That kind of muscular response. So all the jogging in the world's not gonna save you in a situation like that. But anyway, so it's just super interesting to me that we have all these fiber types, but we also have these intermediate fiber types where our muscle fibers are made of a heavy chain and a light chain. Now the heavy chain's pretty much set as either type 1, type 2, type 2X, type 2A, 2B, whatever the hell. But our light chains can be influenced by training, and they start taking on the characteristics of whatever their kind of the training stimulus is. So heavier, faster training is going to stimulate more of a fast twitch response, as opposed to lots of aerobic jogging, stuff like that. It's going to elicit more of a type 1 response. Now the issue is, it's just not as simple as that. So I guarantee you, even if you only do weights over 80%, if you're only lifting over 80, 90% all the time, no human on earth is doing the little amount of volume required to not elicit some kind of aerobic response. All of the recovery from everything we do is aerobic. So any kind of training at all is going to elicit aerobic response. If we only recovered anaerobically, we'd be fucking dead. There's no oxygen, you would die. So there's no such thing as an anaerobic recovery. So with this aerobic response we get from every kind of training, now if you wanted to do training that was just geared towards training your fiber type, you would need volume so stupid low. I mean, you would need to take 45-minute rest intervals. There's just so much stuff that you would have to do that no one has the time or the patience to do, and it wouldn't help. It really wouldn't help. There's, if you have very active type 1 fibers when you're lifting and everything else, when the heavier you go, the better your muscular coordination gets between muscles and actually individual firing. It's not. You don't want to neglect your type 1 fibers, especially if you have more of them, if you're not exactly genetically predisposed to be some awesome fucking lifter, sprinter, or thrower or something. So what I'm really getting at here is it's super interesting to me, after doing some research again in school and stuff, that you need to know who, what populations have the highest cross-sectional area of type 2 fibers. And most people are going to think sprinters or jumpers or throwers or something. The people that have the highest cross-sectional area distribution of type 2, just the fast, explosive fiber typing, are morbidly obese people that barely move, that are basically bedridden invalids, and people who are either quadra or paraplegics. And I know that's totally counterintuitive to what your rational brain wants to tell you, but this is it. We're talking about ingrained survival mechanism, leftover caveman shit. So for the majority of time humans have existed now, we were still hunter-gatherers, we were still, you needed to be strong enough and fast enough to chase down the food, kill the food, and drag the food back to the village. So when you think about it that way, it starts to make sense. Why would our genetic, untrained, just default mode be to divert back to a mainly type 2 dominant muscle fiber distribution? And it's because we are just ready at any given time to fight the fucking saber-toothed tiger that bursts into the cave, to attack the village or whatever, or we need to sprint away from some animal trying to eat us, or we need to, throw a spear through a mammoth and then be able to cut it up and drag it back. It's just, when you think about it, the ultimate survival mechanism that we have is our ability to just do explosive, fast, strong movements. So that's what our kind of default is, and we're only designed to kind of do it once in a while. So that's where the kind of volume of it comes in as well. So when you really start thinking of it this way, I mean, if you were to gear your training towards just purely strength, pure power, pure type 2 development, then your training should be something along the lines of you squat 100% once a week or something, you know, like it needs plenty of time to recover. You need to stimulate no aerobic activity whatsoever. So you can't warm up. You probably shouldn't bend over to tie your shoes. Brushing your teeth is out. That's way too aerobic for your type 1 fiber typing program. Your type 2 fiber typing program. It gets a little ridiculous. So anytime I see anything about like training your fiber type, it's just fucking retarded. Like it's just not very thought out, and you just need to read a book or something. So anyway, so what I'm getting at with that explanation is, and then another thing, kind of on the same token there, it's really interesting when you think about, like what are the mechanisms that make us get sore? What causes that delayed onset muscle soreness to set in? Well, when you think about it, there's still no really good explanations physiologically why we don't get any other traumatic injury we experience. We're hurt right away. It hurts immediately. It swells, but when we have deep muscular damage, we have at least a day or two before we start getting lit up and sore and feeling awful and everything. So what is the reason for that? Well, when you start thinking of it in terms of old leftover caveman stuff, imagine if you had to sprint away from some horrific murder frenzied predator, and as soon as you took your first step, you got immediately as sore as you do 48 hours after a heavy squat workout. You'd fall down and the thing would eat you and you'd die, or be just horrifically maimed and die days later, some even worse death. So I think we have some kind of hormonal milieu reaction to that kind of stuff that makes it so it kind of postpones that pain sensory feeling. Like our nerves are pretty good at either picking up pain or either picking up and kind of signaling for movement, but our nervous system's pretty lousy at doing both of those things. That's the whole idea behind like moving to feel better when you're injured, or moving in general when something's bothering you, or like foam rolling, soft tissue stuff. You just got to get that stuff moving around and bust it up. But anyway, so the reason I'm getting through all this is because it seems like these residual training effects, it seems like a lot of people, if they were to completely cease their bench press training, their bench press would suffer. It would go down pretty fast, pretty significantly, and it'd be kind of hard to get back into that training. But on the other hand, people who don't do any kind of heavy deadlifting for a long period of time and then get back into it seem to be kind of on a, seem to be much better off. A lot of times people do that kind of stuff and they smoke a PR when they get back into it or something, some kind of ridiculous amount of weight they've never done before. So why does that happen? What would be the reasoning behind that? Well, I think when you start thinking along the lines of dropping that volume and actually doing what your fiber typing is meant to do based on, that type 1, type 2 fiber when we were, cave-dwelling hunter-gatherers and stuff, you got a bunch of larger muscles to deal with. It's a larger cross-sectional area, larger distribution of kind of those type 2 fibers. Our upper body in humans in general is pretty weak. It's mostly just aerobic stuff. Like we need our hands for chopping wood and, cutting meat and throwing spears and stuff like that. But our lower body is built for sprinting to and away from death, and that's really about it. So it's just super interesting. This is the kind of stuff that's always been cool to me. I don't even know what kind of field of study I'm even getting into right now. Something that doesn't exist yet, maybe. But yeah, so just I wanted to recap some of that stuff with that conversation. Hopefully this helps somebody plan out their training a little bit better, if you could even remotely follow the insanity I just talked about for 15 minutes. But yeah, all right, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this stuff.